Hello and welcome back to our family video studies of the Gospel of John. I believe this is video number 11, and we are finally in John chapter 4. We've had a lot of discussions so far that have led us to John chapter 4, but I think John chapter 4 is an extremely integral part of the Gospel of John and what it is doing. And since John 4 is such a huge chapter, what I thought I'd do is do something similar to Nicodemus. And we're going to first look at its structure. We're going to first look at why it's here. We're going to do a quick read through of the first 26 verses of the woman of the Samaritan well. We're going to start right in verse 7 though, rather than the first 6 verses. I'll kind of touch on them. But so what I want to do is, why is this story here? And we've kind of already dealt with that. We dealt with it when we talked with Nicodemus about Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman being a twin story of each other. Remember, Nicodemus is a rabbi, right, who's speaking to another rabbi. And he comes to Jesus, acknowledging Jesus as a rabbi. And all of a sudden, what happens? Jesus gives him a teaching about how to enter into the kingdom of God. It must be born of water and spirit, right? We talked about that. And it says that Nicodemus did not understand. And Jesus actually gets onto his case a little bit by saying, Nicodemus, aren't you a rabbi? Aren't you one who should understand? Why don't you understand the things that I'm talking to you about? If I'm just talking physically, what if I talk to you about heavenly things, about the Son of Man having to ascend back up to heaven? And so when we get to this Samaritan woman, this is kind of the twin story. Like I said, you kind of flip from that story, Nicodemus, right into the Samaritan woman. And at the end of John chapter 3, we kind of see sort of an interlude where Jesus is increasing, John is decreasing, Jesus is coming on the scene, John is coming off the scene. And now we get our first real look at Jesus in the Gospel of John, expanding outside of, so far he's dealt with a Jewish customs and the Jewish wedding, right? So he had been around a lot of Jewish people. He was at the temple around a lot of Jewish people, right? All his miracles that he was doing at the end of John chapter 2 were in Jerusalem at Passover around a lot of Jewish people, right? Nicodemus, a Jewish rabbi, he was where he was baptizing around a lot of Jewish people. And then he's finally leaving Judea into Galilee. And it says in John chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, it says, he left Judea, went into Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. And I love the way the Bible says that. He had to pass through Samaria. One, you could kind of look at that geographically, where he had to literally go through Samaria. But a lot of Jews, it is said that they would go around Samaria because they thought so bad about the Samaritans that they wouldn't even go through Samaria. And if you don't know who the Samaritans are, if you recall back in the Old Testament, there were 12 nations of Israel, okay? Well, after the time of Solomon, when Solomon died and Rehoboam and Jeroboam, right, took over, Solomon's son, the kingdom split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. There was 10 northern tribes, two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and the rest were 10 northern tribes. And they made their capital, in a sense, their place of worship, Samaria. All right, and Samaria became the new Jerusalem for the 10 northern tribes. And they were kind of intermixed with other nations because Assyria had come in and conquered them. And so the Jews, somewhere along the way, saw Samaritans as kind of this half-breed people. They didn't want to acknowledge them in a sense of being full-blown Jews. They actually, in many cases, thought they were worse than regular Gentiles because they were Jews with mixed blood. They had mixed lineage. And if you know anything about the lineage of Jesus, Jesus has mixed lineage with Gentiles and all these kind of things that come in. So, their qualms against the Samaritans are really qualms they should have against themselves. And that's something that you see with the Jews all the time. And that's why Jesus and Paul would say, are you not teaching yourself? You teach these things, yet you fall into these categories. You teach about not lying. Aren't you a liar? You teach about not stealing. Aren't you a thief? All these kind of teachings come into play. And the Jews really fall into this trap over and over and over again. So now it says Jesus has to go to Samaria. It seems as if John is saying not just that he has to pass through Samaria to get to Galilee, because that's why put that in the story, right? There's other places where it said he just traveled here. He doesn't name all the cities that he would have to go through to get to this city. And here he had to go through some. It's like Jesus is on a mission, okay? Jesus is on a mission to let people know that this gospel that he is bringing, right, this good news of the kingdom, he talks with this news about the kingdom, and then immediately John has him going, baptizing, and then going into Samaria, right? He goes into Samaria and talking to a Samaritan woman. A woman who is, by the way, here, let me pull this up. Let's read verse 7. It says, "There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink,' for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans.'" Okay, so here we're going to kind of stop right here for a moment. And the first thing we need to know, Samaritan, she's out to draw water, and many scholars have noted that she is by herself, which within itself put her as she's a social outcast when it comes to Jews just because she's a Samaritan. Okay, check one, right? Check mark one against her. Check mark two is she's a woman and Jesus is a single man. And a single man did not talk to women in public. And so check mark number two. Check mark number three is she is out by this well by herself, and women would travel in groups. They would go at certain times of the day to go out to this well, and so she's by herself. So her own city, Samaria, also sees her as a social outcast. That's what the text is leading us to believe. And later it confirms that with her marriage situation and all the different husbands and men she's been with. Even the Samaritans, right? Even the Samaritans had laws against, or, had ideas about marriage and divorce and remarriage and all these kind of things. And so she seems to be a social outcast. She's a Samaritan, she's a woman, she's married, she's coming out to the well by herself, she's all by herself. And so Jesus, when he comes and he speaks to her, what he's doing is he's breaking down social barriers. And I think that's extremely important what Jesus does over and over and over again. When he goes and he cleansed lepers or he touched lepers' face, I mean, you wouldn't even go near a leper, let alone touch a leper. Yet Jesus is breaking social barriers so that he may bring the gospel to the lost and dying world. And application-wise, that's what we need to be doing as the church. There's so many social barriers, even in the United States of America, that we just, we live in the North City. We have a huge Mexican population. And, so for us as a church to reach our, the Mexican population is extremely difficult. One, because we don't speak, I don't speak Spanish, and I'd love to learn some Spanish. And we have actually helped several Spanish-speaking families. We've used Google Translate, so we try to use all those things as much as possible. We started a Spanish ministry, which we now have going, and we try to support them and help them in any way that we can. Some of the best people that I know. But to break down these social barriers, we have a social barrier. There's one end of town, where the large majority of Mexican population live, and then there's the other part of town where there's not a whole lot of, they've got their own grocery store right down the street, and a wonderful restaurant, by the way, inside. Go and eat there sometime. And they've got their own grocery store. They've got their own little laundromats and all these kind of things. There's a lady down the road that sells her own tortadas or whatever they're called, and tortillas and all these things. You can get them real cheap. But there's social barriers that we as a church, Jesus did it so well, no matter what people thought of him. That's why I'm really not a fan of people using a verse like 1 Thessalonians 5, avoid the appearance of evil. You could be around a place where people would think that you're engaging in this or engaging in that. Now, I understand, you don't want to be at a late night club, bar, stripping club to go preach the gospel, but Jesus spoke to adulterous women. Jesus spoke to those kind of people when they came, and he didn't avoid those people. But there's scenes in which it's really no good to be at. People are already drunk or these things are going on. So I want to avoid extremes in either case. But nothing is inherently wrong if you're going to an environment to try to preach the gospel to people. Now, you just got to use wisdom. So I'll end there. Don't want to go too far. But so Jesus is kind of breaking down these social barriers. But what another thing that he's doing, it's an interesting thing that he's coming to her at a well. You know, a well is a place kind of like our modern day coffee shops. I love that whole imagery where people, when they'd gather water, they'd come and they'd kind of talk, you know, probably get the town gossip going, and that's kind of where you'd meet your people. You know, you all go out together. It's kind of a social event. And so if you wanted to meet people, go to a well. There's certain places. A well is one of those places, especially, you know, Jacob's well here. Once again, this video is going to be more structure in reading the story and its placement in the Gospel of John rather than, you know, getting into the meat, which we'll probably do in part 2, or we will do in part 2 next time. And so Jesus is breaking these social barriers down. And it says, you know, back, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me a drink since I'm a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritan. That's really the big one, right? That's the one the text brings out. That's really the biggest one, is you are a Jewish man. I am a Samaritan. Why are you talking to me? And, you know, that's kind of the response we want to get from people. That's the kind of people we want to be reaching. And so when you go to reach them, well, why are you here? You know, we have no dealings with each other. Actually, we do, right? Ordinarily, in the ways of the world, I have no reason to be here speaking to you. But my heavenly calling, as Jesus is going to say later, the food that I eat is to do the will of the Father. And so the Samaritans play a key role here in Jesus expanding this gospel, Jesus expanding this belief that goes beyond just the Jews himself. He spent mostly with the Jews so far, right? It's been Jewish. Now we're into the Samaritan, you know, people. And then later in the Gospel of John, we're going to see how Gentiles are even being preached to in the kingdom. And Jesus has the same pattern that he establishes in Acts 2 in Judea, you know, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and in the uttermost parts of the world. That's how the kingdom was going to spread. Start where people are more densely populated when it comes to their belief in God, and then spread out to give to the Jew first and then to the Greek, right? And so these are kind of a half-breed, you know, I'm saying that very accommodatively, you know, kind of thing. So let's see how the story progresses as we continue, okay? It says, verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And so what Jesus is trying to do here is he's trying to establish a relationship, right? And that's something that we need to work on very much so. He's trying to establish a relationship that goes beyond the way the world sees the way we are interacting right now. You know, when his disciples come later, and it's going to say they're coming out and they see that he's speaking with this woman, and they wouldn't even talk to him about it. You know, they were so nervous, it seemed to be, about it, that they wouldn't talk to. I want to break this barrier down for a moment. Recognize who I am. I am more than what family I was born into. I am more than, you know, what demographic I come from, or culture I come from, or ethnicity I am. He says, I am the Son of God. Now, we can't make that claim as Christians, right? We're not the Son of God, but we can say, hey, listen, I am more than, you know, when you deal with a topic like racism, right? I am more than my skin color. You are more than your skin color. Can we come and have a conversation that goes beyond, hey, you're a white man talking to me, why? Or you're a black man talking to me, why? No, I am a child of God, and you are a child of God, or at least created in the eyes of God. God loves you, and so you have a soul, you have an eternal, you know, soul, you have a being that God desires and longs for and loves, and that's the way I'm going to see you. That's the way you need to see me. And so we need to build relationships with people that go beyond what we look like, our culture, our ethnicity, even our upbringing. You know, there are some people, you know, I'm a northern boy living in the South, and for some people that can be a hard pill to swallow, or southern people who maybe go up north. Now, north doesn't necessarily have the stigma as much as I think the reversal is, but, you know, I get called a Yankee and all these things in jest and joking. I understand. and it really doesn't affect me at all. But that's within itself a barrier that we have to be able to get across, and we have to be able to breach, and we have to be able to cross over and remove all these things that would normally hinder me conversing with you or you conversing with me. Is the fact that there's something more important at stake here than how I view your upbringing, or how you were raised, or how you choose to raise your children, or how you choose to live your life versus how I choose to live my life. That we need to be able to have a conversation about eternal and spiritual things, so that we can at least get all out on the playing field. And that's really what not Jesus is just going to do, but what you're going to see here is the Samaritan woman is going to challenge Jesus in many ways as well. And so there's this back and forth. And what I want us to understand is truth always wins. And truth, but truth doesn't always convince. Truth always wins, but truth doesn't always convince. You see that in Nicodemus, at least not right away, right? And you see that with the Pharisees, you see that with the scribes, you see that with many people. The truth always wins, but it doesn't always convince, okay? And it doesn't always convict. Sometimes it convinces, but it doesn't always convict. And so there's a lot of, hey, that's preachable right there. Okay, so let's kind of get back into the story here for a moment. She said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us the well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?" So, before we get into, some heavy stuff there in the next part, I just want to show that she sees her roots going all the way back to Jacob, which, by the way, right, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. She is saying my lineage is just as much an Abrahamic lineage, and she knows the Old Testament stories. She knows, how important Jacob is and the wells that he went and actually established and built, and how important they are and significant they are, where they are, and the stories behind them. And she's saying, for you to say that you have a greater water, a better water than what we have right here, right now, you are claiming to be greater than Jacob, right? And Jacob his name was changed to what? Israel, okay? And so he is the founder, right, of the 12 tribes. He's the father of the 12 tribes. And Jesus is claiming something greater here. And she's asking a whole lot more questions, better questions, than Nicodemus did. Remember Nicodemus? And I thought I had this white back. Remember Nicodemus? His question was, how do I get back into my mother's womb? Right? Kind of a sarcastic, this question. And she's like, hey, I'm going back to Jacob. She's bringing up some theology here, right? Are you saying you're greater than Jacob? Are you saying you're greater than our fathers? Our faith is built upon, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob, kind of that last of the promise, that is repeated, the three promise, the seed promise that is repeated through till we get to the time of Jesus. Not saying it doesn't follow through, but they're the big three: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, especially Jacob being the head of the 12 tribes, the father of the 12 tribes. And he's claiming something greater, and she understands that he's doing this, and she's kind of being honest. But let's look at Jesus's response here. Let's see what Jesus has to say. Jesus answered and said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again." That's Jacob's water, okay? "But whoever drinks of the water that I give him shall never thirst, but the water that I give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life." I think this is extremely important. The things that Jesus is bringing to the table is the fact that you have to come out here to draw this water. I'm giving you a well, right? I'm giving you a well that walks with you, that goes with you. It's kind of like the same idea of the temple imagery, where there is a stationary temple that you go to worship, and I'm giving you something where you become the temple of God. And this is actually going to come up in our discussion here in a little bit. So let's get into this next slide as we continue walking through. Once again, we're doing more structure, we're doing more flow of thought and kind of reading through before we get into some of this meat, okay? So verse 15, the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so I will not be thirsty, nor come all the way out here to draw." So she's thinking physically, kind of Nicodemus. They're on the same, there's some comparisons here. There is some similarities here. She doesn't fully grasp this because nobody would have talked to her like this ever before in her life. Kind of a strange conversation. He said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." And it's, go call your husband. And he knew exactly what he was doing. Jesus knows exactly how many husbands she has, or the one who she's with now is not currently her husband. He knows her background story. And here's what the woman answered, kind of deflect. "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have correctly said, I have no husbands, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This you have said truly." And, so there's some different things that could be going on here. One, Jesus has heard about her because she's a social outcast. She's had women. She's had other husbands. Maybe he's heard about her. But I don't think she suspects that. I think she's being honest in verse 19. The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." But then she goes and she throws some more theology at him. I love the Samaritan woman. I mean, this is a woman who knows her Bible, who knows the promises of God, who knows the distinctions between Jew and Samaria, and she's probably heard these teachings her whole life, and she's thought about these things. She's contemplated these things. Look at this. "Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet, but our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." And let's get into this next slide here. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem you will worship the Father." And so here's her discussion point. You're giving us water. We're talking about living water. Okay. She wants to bring this back to the Jew and Samaritan. Okay, who's right? You tell me who's right. Go all the way back to Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Who was correct at splitting? Who was which mountain is correct? Which way of worship is correct? And Jesus will acknowledge here in a moment, an hour is coming, right? Where you will not worship in this place or that place. But verse 22 says, "For you worship what you do not know, we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." So he acknowledges for a moment. He wants to answer her theology here in the fact that Jerusalem is the place of true worship, okay? We were correct. You were incorrect. You should not have established another place of worship, no matter the method or the mode or the reasons why they did it. Rehoboam was a jerk, right? Solomon was hard on him. Jeroboam came to him and said, "Hey, man, can you lighten up a little bit?" And he said, "No, I will not lighten up. I'm actually going to make this work even harder." So, but he just kind of acknowledges that. But verse 23 is kind of the kicker. Like I said, I'm not trying to go too long. We'll probably be at 30 minutes by the time we're done. "An hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers." So, you have this idea of mountain where worshipers are seeking God. And now this reversal is God seeking worshipers. Okay, and this is what Jesus' entire mission is. When you see Jesus here living on this earth, Jesus is out now searching for people. Okay, and Nicodemus sought him out, right? But he has sought her out. He has come to her. I had to go to Samaria, right? Jesus had to go to Samaria. And he searches her out. And he's looking for worshipers, even beyond Jerusalem, beyond the Jerusalem borders, which goes to show this gospel is something that's more than just a Jewish lineage. It's going to go to Samaria. It's going to go to Gentiles. It's going to go to everybody who will come to believe in Jesus the Christ. And so I don't know why I took myself away. But the woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Look at the amount of theology and understanding this girl has. This girl, this woman, she knows her Bible. She knows her Old Testament promises. She knows her Old Testament stories. She knows, she's deep-rooted in some of these things. There are people who have been raised in the church who probably could not have gone toe-to-toe with Jesus in answering promises and theologies, men or women alike, And so this woman is a smart woman. She knows her stuff, and she's not going to be easily swayed. But so far, she has seen facts. Jesus has answered with truth. He has shown her things and said things about her life. And he has said these things in a way in which nobody else has said. No one else has spoken like Jesus. And you'll see that really emphasized in the Gospel of John as Jesus does things and says things that no other prophet or rabbi has ever done. He claims these things by authority, and they make sense, right? And she sees it, and he says, I who speak to you am he. Very rarely did Jesus come out so bluntly and actually tell people, yes, I am the one. And so a lot of times, he won't do that. And so look at her response. Verse 27. At this point, his disciples came and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman, yet no one said, what do you seek, or why do you speak with her? So the woman left her water pot, went into the city, and said to the men, come and see a man who told me all the things that I've done. This is not the Christ, is it? They went out of the city and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So disciples were saying to one another, no one bought him anything to eat, did he? Here's the differences, once again, between these stories. You see Nicodemus. You don't see his immediate response. You see it later. It's kind of delayed. But Nicodemus questions Jesus once. Jesus responds, challenges him, silence, nothing. We get 0 from him. And then all of a sudden, the Samaritan woman now, she responds to Jesus, and immediately she leaves her water pots. It's so significant. The reason why she came out to the well to begin with, she took his words to heart that what he has to offer is better water. And so she goes back to Samaria. She tells all the city, and the city were coming out to him, and his disciples were just, hey, Jesus, you want some food? All this is, they heard the bits end of that conversation, her running back, leaving her water pot, and the best they've got for him. Hey, Jesus, do you want some food? Rabbi, eat. I have food. Did someone bring him food that we don't know of? Watch this. This next verse. And here we're going to end in the verse 38. Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. That's what Jesus has been doing. This summarizes this section. This is the epitome of the mission of Jesus, and it needs to be the epitome of the mission of the church, is to seek and to save the lost, right? And to tell people about Jesus, to teach people who even have theologies or have understandings of God and who God may be or may not be. If they're incorrect, our job is to gently guide them and to show them. Now we have to do it a little differently than Jesus does. We can't call off their whole life story and all the things that he does here. But we still have power in the gospel, and that's where the power really is. And, if Jesus just told her about her life, but never gave her the gospel, it really would mean nothing. The power is in the fact, the teaching of Jesus as being the Messiah, okay? It says, do you not say there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They are white for harvest. And what you're going to see in the next section is it's the Samaritans coming out. This is your harvest. It's plentiful. Lift up your eyes, look, they are white for the harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for the life eternal. And we know the one who reaps is Jesus and God. He's already receiving his wages. Jesus has sowed the seed of the kingdom in the Samaritan woman. She's gone and spread it to her city. They're coming out, and he's about to reap fruit from that. He says, for in this case, the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap for that which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. You know what's interesting, making this connection, is the Samaritan woman already had this teaching and understanding about the Messiah and Jesus and all the things that would have to happen. And so what Jesus did was just plant a seed, take where she was. That's the best thing about it. Where are you? Some of these times, these dry evangelism that put everybody in the same block, put everybody in the same algorithm, put everybody in the same curriculum, just doesn't work. There are some people who are at different places, and you got to start where they are and take their life and their life experiences and their story, and you got to teach Jesus through that. You got to show Jesus through that, and that's how evangelism, I believe, works better than anything. And so in this study, what we want to see, once again, this is kind of a twin story of Nicodemus, a rabbi who would not accept, at least not right away, no comment, to a Samaritan woman who hears, sees, challenges. Jesus answers her challenges, shows her things, teaches her, and look at the response of her belief. The response is the fact that she dropped everything that she had, and that's what Christianity is about. It's about dying to self, dying to our goals and our thoughts and the things that we desire and the things we want to do, and it is now to do the will of God. The Samaritan woman got it. She went to do the will of God by telling people about Jesus. Jesus did the will of God by telling people about Jesus. The disciples did not get that yet. The Jews did not get that. And I think the church sometimes lacks that understanding. So even during all the things that we're going through, to tell people about Jesus, to tell people the story of Christ is still the mission of the church. I love you. I hope you guys have a great day. And next time we'll have part 2 where we'll really get into some of the teachings that Jesus has in the book of John.